We have not only obligations to fulfill, we have great opportunities to realize. John F. Kennedy.
Zaire at that time was known as a kleptocracy. It was run by a dictator who had been in power since 1965, Mobutu Sese Seko Kumbendo Wazabanga, was his full name, which means mighty rooster who goes from conquest to conquest, leaving no hen untouched. Or, as I like to translate it colloquially, one tough mother.
Skip Waskin has more than 40 years' experience in international development, including some of the largest U.S. agency for international development missions in the world. But for all his success, he almost didn't make it in his very first job, which started as an intern in what was then known as Zaire. Today, we go all the way back to where it began. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft
Power.
Powerful.
Soft
Power.
Powerful stories.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful. Stories.
I was born in Lansing, Michigan in 1958. Basically, there are three industries in Lansing. There was Oldsmobile, the state government, and Michigan State University. Oldsmobile is sadly now long gone. But my parents worked in the other two industries. My father was some very senior person in the State Department of Education, and my mother was a professor of education at Michigan State. So she in particular had a great impact on me because as part of her work, she took our whole family, myself and my younger brother, to some very exotic places. When I was 10 years old, she took me to Guatemala. And a few years later, age 13, she took us to Nicaragua. And I know that those two experiences really kicked off my interest in international affairs and in particular international development. My parents had a dinner party, and I recall a friend of my parents, a woman, asking me, "So, Skippy," which is what they called me then, "what do you want to do when you grow up?" And I remember very distinctly telling her, "I'm going to go to Georgetown University, and then I'm going to become a diplomat," which is exactly what happened, although with a lot of twists and turns and cul-de-sacs in between. But yes, I ended up going first to Kalamazoo College as an undergraduate, and then did my master's degree at Georgetown. And immediately upon graduating from Georgetown, I went to Kinshasa, Zaire, to serve as an intern in the econ section of the U.S. Embassy there. So the prediction that I made for myself at 12 years old largely came true.
Before we get to Zaire, can I ask what inspired a 12-year-old to want to be a diplomat?
I'm not sure a diplomat. I knew, again, the trips to Guatemala and then later to Nicaragua inspired me to want to serve internationally. And I was smart enough to figure out that a career in diplomacy was certainly one of those ways. And I was always attracted. Again, both my parents were public servants, so I always gravitated toward public service. I never thought of, well, maybe I could pursue a career in, say, international banking, for example. I had a professor at Kalamazoo College, a wonderful man named Bill Pruitt, who was a history professor, and I'd taken a class in African history from him. Dr. Pruitt described himself as a white African because he, in fact, had been born in Zaire and the child of missionary parents. And so he really piqued my interest in that country. And when I had applied for this internship in the State Department, naturally had to write an essay, and I wrote about U.S. policy toward the Mobutu regime in Zaire. And I'm sure they looked at that and said, okay, this wise guy wants to write about that. We're going to send him to Kinshasa, which is exactly what they did.
Between 1971 and 1997, what is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo was known as Zaire. It was ruled for 3 decades by Mobutu Sese Seko, who came to power in a coup backed by Western powers. Mobutu enriched himself through corruption and patronage while repressing opposition until he was eventually overthrown.
I had really no idea what I was getting into. I had a professor at Georgetown, a professor of economics, guy named George Vixens, who talked about the fact, with great pride, about the fact that he was a consultant from time to time for this thing called the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. And I believe that was probably the first time I'd ever heard the acronym USAID. So to my mind, there were three entities in the U.S. government that dealt with foreign policy and foreign affairs: the State Department, the National Security Council I knew of, and then there's this new thing called USAID. I didn't know any more than that. And so I was going out to Kinshasa to work in the embassy there, not really understanding what an embassy did or what I was getting myself into. But, I was 23 years old and ready for adventure, ready for anything. And adventure is what I found. Zaire at that time was known as a kleptocracy. It was run by a dictator who had been in power since 1965, Mobutu Sese Seko Kumbendo Wazabanga, was his full name, which means mighty rooster who goes from conquest to conquest, leaving no hen untouched. Or, as I like to translate it colloquially, one tough mother, which he was. It had a reputation as being one of the most difficult places in Africa. General Mobutu, he'd been a general when he seized power in 1965 in a coup d'etat, and so 16 years later, he's still there. Was still there when I arrived. General Mobutu was perceived to be an ally of the United States in the Cold War struggle that was going on. Again, saying this is 1981. And Mobutu was seen as a bulwark against communism in Africa. The obvious incompetence of his government and the corruption of his government notwithstanding, we were supporting it. I thought I was going to one of the worst places in the world. The people there couldn't have been nicer. And frankly, the people there couldn't have been happier. These are people who know how to party. They know how to have a good time. Wonderful music, wonderful beer, wonderful food. It was a very, very welcoming environment, which is not at all what I had expected. So when I got there, I was assigned to work in the econ section of the U.S. Embassy. I had an interesting time doing that. I was particularly responsible for coordinating the embassy's input into the International Fair of Kinshasa, 1981, or in its French acronym, FICIN. And I spent a good deal of time on that. And then the commercial officer had to leave. I don't know if it was home leave, I can't remember. But I took over as the acting commercial officer, which gave me the opportunity to interact directly with with members of the country team, because I was there on an acting basis.
The U.S. Embassy Country Team is the ambassador's senior leadership group that coordinates the work of all the U.S. agencies operating in a host country.
While I was there, I was taken up to one of the country team meetings of what they called the bubble, a secure room within the embassy Kinshasa. And I, of course, met Ambassador Oakley. Robert Oakley was the ambassador. But I met two guys from this thing called USAID. I didn't really know what they did. The mission director was a man named Norm Sweet, and his general development officer, a fellow named Derek Singer. After the country team meeting, Mr. Singer approached me and said, we have a lot of vacancies at USAID, and your predecessor in this summer internship with the State Department actually took a job with USAID. Maybe you want to do the same thing. Well, I thought that was a pretty good idea. I was having a great time in Zaire, learning a great deal, obviously. I wanted to find a way to stay. So Mr. Singer told me the thing to do is go talk to this guy, Lee Braddock, who is the head of what they call the Capital Projects Office in USAID Kinshasa. So I called Mr. Braddock, and he said, come on over here on Saturday morning. Saturday morning is just a normal working day here at USAID. Be here at 8:30. All right. So I showed up at 8:30 on a Saturday morning, and Mr. Braddock interviewed me. Now, in the course of this interview, this gives you a sense of the times, Mr. Braddock smoked, I started counting, 36 cigarettes and drank 21 cups of coffee. I tried to keep up. I think I smoked about 8 cigarettes and maybe had 7 or 8 cups of coffee, and I didn't sleep for 3 days. I was completely wired. But Lee never stopped. He was a very intense guy. And at the end of this 3.5-hour, rather wide-ranging interview, I remember quite distinctly, he looked at me and said, well, you're obviously not qualified for this position, but what the hell, I'm desperate, so start next week. And that was the start of my USAID career. Got off to a ringing endorsement like that. He was desperate. I wasn't qualified, but there we go. And I did start. I do remember the very first day walking into his office again, same office which I'd been interviewed. It was like 7:30 in the morning. He started 7:30, 8 o'clock. I stood in the doorway and he was looking at a pile of papers and writing, and he basically ignored me. I cleared my throat and he ignored me again. I cleared my throat again and he looked up over his reading glasses, glared at me and said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, I'm here." He said, "I can see that." And then I said, I'm ready to work." He said, "Good." And I said, "Well, where do you want me to sit?" And he pounded the table and said, "Sit! I'm not paying you to sit. I want you." And then he started off a whole litany of things that he wanted me to do. There were a number of things that he wanted me to work on, a number of stalled projects, stalled infrastructure projects. And one of these was the Boma Dry Dock, which was the rehabilitation of a dry dock facility at the Atlantic coast port of Boma, which was about 200 miles to the west of Kinshasa on what they called then the Zaire River. Now we call it. This has been known for generations since Joseph Conrad wrote about it, the Congo River. The issue here was that USAID had begun to rehabilitate this particular facility. A dry dock, as you may know, is a rather large floating vessel that into which other ships are pulled or towed, and where then repairs can take place of the other ships. This dry dock was the central source of income for the town of Boma. USAID had decided in its wisdom in the mid-1970s that the dry dock needed to be rehabilitated. The dry dock started to rehabilitate it, and then they either ran out of money or they couldn't finish the job. And so the dry dock had been sitting for at least 3 years unfinished, but also because it was in the midst of being rehabilitated, unusable, which had destroyed the central source of income for the town of Boma. So this really isn't exactly what we had hoped to accomplish here. Our work had done a great deal of damage, and nobody in 3 years had done anything about it. So this was great. I said, well, I think I need to go down to Boma to see the dry dock. I went to the USAID. I filled out a trip request form and got Lee to sign it, and it was duly approved. And I went to the USAID executive officer and said, I need a vehicle. And he said, we have no vehicles. What do you mean we have no vehicles? There are only three. This vehicle's broken, that vehicle's broken. This is an office with 30 Americans working in it, and probably twice that many Zairean professionals working with them. So, probably close to 100 people. And at this point, they had 3 vehicles to support that and the motor pool. So he said, you're welcome to avail yourself of public transportation, which I did. I said, all right, again, I didn't want to create a problem. I was a new employee, and what the hell, I'll just take a bus down there. And to get to Boma by bus from Kinshasa, it turns out it takes 2 days, because you have to go to a larger port a little bit upriver called Matadi. And I somehow had to stay overnight in Matadi. Now, I didn't know where I was going to stay in Matadi, but I did know because I had met 2 young women, 2 Peace Corps volunteers in Kinshasa. My house was kind of a flop house. It was near again, let me give you another story. I digress, but it's interesting. Bill Pruitt, whom I mentioned, my old professor, a white African, who had piqued my interest in Zaire, had become the director of the Peace Corps. He resigned from Kalamazoo College and become Peace Corps director in Kinshasa. So, of course, Bill and I knew each other. We saw each other. It was a relatively small embassy. People saw each other all the time. And he told me, we got a lot of Peace Corps volunteers come in from outside the city, and they stay in what we call the Malad house, the sick house. Whether they're sick or not, that's just their guest house for people coming in, but they don't have enough room. And you live just a few blocks away. Could I send people your way? Sure, what the hell? I got a 3-bedroom apartment to myself, plus several couches, so I didn't care. And so I had Peace Corps volunteers passing through all the time. And these 2 young women had passed through, and when I say young, I mean they were my age, in their early 20s. And they said they were in Matadi. So all I knew were their first names, and I knew they were in Matadi. Somebody asked me, how are you going to find these women? And I said, I'm going to get off the bus. I'm going to look at the first person find the first person I know. I'm going to say, where do the 2 American girls live? And remember, Matadi is a city of 250,000 people. This is not just a village. I got off the bus, found a shoe shine guy. I thought he must know what's going on around here. I said, where are the 2 American girls? Well, they're right over, Bingo, exactly. Only in Africa. The two American girls are over there. They're up on the third floor of that apartment building. I walked over there, knocked on their door, and said, "I'm here. You stayed at my place. Now I'm here." Anyway, so I spent the night there, checked on their couch, and then somehow, and I actually don't recall how, I got to Boma the next day. I think there was another bus, but it couldn't go because there's no road along the river. You had to go through the mountains. But I got to Boma. This all sounds weird because there's no telephones, right? I mean, we couldn't call ahead and say to people, Skip's coming from USAID, who's going to, none of this was prearranged. I just showed up, which at the time in Zaire was very normal. You just showed up. I went to the port, introduced myself, said I want to go see the dry dock. I remember they took me out on a little launch. The dry dock's a little bit offshore. And I'm not an engineer. I don't know what I'm looking at, but the purpose of the visit was to go take pictures and say, all right, this thing, A, there really is a dry dock down there. B, it's not functioning. And then maybe with these pictures, we can then work with the ONATRA, they called it, the National Transportation Office, and we can develop a plan to actually bring this thing to closure. My idea after seeing it, my plan was, what I was trying to accomplish was to get the dry dock back to functional state, right? Let's get the thing working again. Let's not try to rehabilitate it. Let's not bring it up to standards of the late 20th century. Let's just get the thing working as it was, say, in the 1930s when it was built. That would be enough. We need to undo the damage that we've done. So there were people there who were actually quite happy to see me. I took a room in a local hotel after going through this visit. And I thought, I've got a lot of notes here. Again, I didn't have a smartphone. I wasn't taking, obviously, I wasn't recording things, but I was taking pictures and taking notes. And I thought I really should write all this stuff up. But my room was so hot. There's no air conditioning and probably no electricity at that point. There were power blackouts. I said, I got to go downstairs. I'll go downstairs and sit in the bar. It looks like they have a generator that's running, electricity and fans down there. So I'm sitting in a bar, writing in my notebook, probably drinking one of the local beers, it's called Primus. And there are some rather rough-looking, official-looking types, some military, some in civilian clothes, glaring at me from across the bar. Well, I don't pay any attention. And then one of them walks up to the table and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, I'm writing my report. Report? Yeah, I've been here, and I start to explain myself. And then, "You're a spy. You're under arrest. Stand up." So they make me stand up, and they're gonna rough me up. It's obvious, and probably drag me off to jail. I said, wait a minute, guys, wait a minute. There's been a misunderstanding here. And really not listening, but I mentioned the name. I said, I can't remember his name, but I said, "Citizen so-and-so." In Zaire at that point, there were no Madame, Monsieur, no Mr. and Miss. Everybody was a citizen. So I said, "Citoyen," which is the French word for citizen. Ask Citoyen, whatever, Lubanga, from the ONATRA, from the National Transportation Office, who I am and why I'm here. Well, happily for me, they agreed to do that. They found Citoyen, whoever he was, after having a conversation with him. They realized this man is here to help the city. So suddenly I was no longer a prisoner. I was a hero. They bought me drinks and they bought me food. And I remember we all went out to a movie that night together, and it was just a wonderful experience. And they remember them toasting me and the future of Boma, and the friendship of the United States, and the future of the dry dock. I was able to go back to Kinshasa, again, taking a bus, and report on the fact that there was this dry dock and my recommendations were accepted. And we did, over a period of time, work with the Office des Routes, and we got the thing back to working order. To prepare for this interview, I was looking on Google Earth the other night at the port of Boma, and I was pleased to see that dry dock is still there, exactly where I left it 45 years ago. I cannot tell from Google Earth whether it is functioning or not, but I can verify that it is, in fact, still there almost half a century later. So that was really my first major assignment for USAID, where I almost ended up getting myself arrested, but it all turned out well in the end.
That's a great story. My prediction is that dry dock will always be there.
Probably.
Till it sinks.
Until it sinks, precisely. Yes,
exactly.
That's right. After the 4-month contract was up, I signed another contract. I ended up staying through the end of 1983. So I stayed almost 2.5 years. I remember actually, this was probably Christmas time around 1981, and I had decided not to come home effectively. I'd left for 3 months, Ended up staying for 7 months, and now I was going to stay for another couple of years without coming home. And there were no telecommunications. So I hadn't spoken to my mother, since May, and this is December. So I really felt like I should get a message to her. And so I went down to the only way you could do this would be to go down to the central post office, stand in line, and then try to get a phone to the United States. I finally got up to the front desk after standing in line for probably, 45 minutes or so. And the guy said, "Oh, monsieur, c'est dommage, mais les États-Unis sont en panne. I'm sorry, sir, the United States is out of order." I said, the whole country? Yep, completely. So, well, how much would it cost, you think, to fix it and put it back in order? Well, maybe around $10. There we go. So for $10, a little access, 10 or 20 bucks, I got, so things are better. Suddenly we have communications. So I was able to spend 5 minutes on a very scratchy line with my mother saying, "Mom, I'm okay, but I'm coming back. I'm going to stay. Everything's good here." I mean, it was clear I loved the work. I loved doing what I was doing. And I realized that I had found a professional home that I wanted to stay with. And I ended up actually doing a total of 6 years. I went back to the States for a while, but missed Zaire and missed the job I had. So went back and spent another 3 years with USAID Zaire, at the end of which I became a direct hire employee. So that initial 4-month contract turned into a 37-year engagement with USAID.
Was it difficult for you as you moved through the ranks and moved up to hang on to that kind of on the ground feeling?
What I found was that you had to make a very deliberate effort to not lose contact with that. And to the extent I could, and it wasn't always possible, but I think I did a pretty good job of it throughout my career. Very early in my time, I said, I got to go see these projects. I got to go see the work in the field, because I'm not very smart, right? I can't learn. People, when I got to be mission director in Afghanistan, they gave me a 280, 300-page briefing book with every detail of that the mission had been doing for the previous 6 years. And I just couldn't absorb all that material. But if I flew out to the location and met the people there and talked to them, then suddenly all that material that was incomprehensible to me earlier, suddenly my brain could absorb it. And so I always made a point of that throughout my career, to go to, as soon as I could, go to the field, see what was happening, and then I had a frame of reference into which all this new information could be poured.
As we come to the close of this episode, I want to give Skip the chance to respond to our Aunt Deb.
Why do we need to fix a dry dock halfway across the world when we have our own infrastructure issues to fix?
Look, I think that obviously this is a question that everyone who works on foreign assistance needs to think about, needs to be able to answer. You have to think very carefully about what you're doing. I always answer that foreign assistance is not charity. And I had my own aunt, several aunts, in fact, that asked me questions like this, and I would respond to them that foreign assistance is not charity. This is an investment in the future, as it were, of the United States. Now, at the time, we believed that by helping to stabilize a country like Zaire, we were helping the United States. We were helping make the United States safer, because, again, if you look back to the lens of the Cold War, what was going on in Zaire at that time, what was going on in Central Africa, immediately across from the Boma Dry Dock on the other side of the river was Angola, where there was a war going on. There was a civil war happening, literally several hundred yards away. We didn't want to get involved in that war. We were supporting one side of it. The whole point here of providing civilian assistance is to create conditions wherein military assistance, security assistance is no longer required. You don't have to send American young, I was about to say American boys, but I should say young American people to battle. You don't have to invest militarily. You don't have to spend all the money and all the blood and treasure that you would need to if you can prevent these conflicts from becoming, or these problems from becoming, acute in the first place. So yes, the Boma Dry Dock in a place like Zaire was a very, very small piece of that. But it was undertaken not just out of charity, but because it's in the interest of the United States to help it. From the perspective of half a century later, Was it a wise thing to do to try to stabilize Zaire, try to support the Mobutu regime? I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. At the end of the day, we did win. The Cold War ended. The United States and the Western powers were victorious in the Cold War, but whether staving off communism or trying to stave off communism in Zaire played a part in that or not, that's a very difficult question to answer.
Earlier this year, Skip Waskin and his wife Oyuna founded their own company, International Solutions, which focuses on disaster preparation, special education, monitoring and evaluation, and software development. In this new role, Skip is expanding the company's portfolio in areas where his background in humanitarian response and development can add value, and to design programs that are both innovative and grounded in the realities these communities face. Skip worked for USAID for more than 3 decades, including as mission director in both Russia and Afghanistan, deputy mission director in Karachi, Pakistan, and a variety of key roles in Islamabad, Mongolia, Thailand, Madagascar, Honduras, Nicaragua, Kenya, and of course, a country formerly known as Zaire. He was also the director of the Haiti Task Force team following the devastating earthquake there in 2010. Skip is a BA in political science from Kalamazoo College and, as he predicted as a 12-year-old, a master's degree in foreign service from Georgetown University. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it. If you haven't followed us already wherever you get your podcasts, please do so. Please leave a rating. It means a lot to us. And not only that, but it helps get those algorithms moving this show to the ears that need to hear it, or that we would like to hear it. You can find out much more by visiting our website at softpowerfulstories.org. There you can learn more about our guests, see pictures of them in action, find out the music that we use, and, of course, leave feedback. We would love to hear from you. Our show's logo was designed by Kate Furby, and my friend Kathy Zilski voices Dubious Aunt Deb, who, of course, she is nothing like, but she does it perfect. My name is Christopher Wurst. I'm the host and producer of Soft Powerful Stories. Until next time.